Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Some Stops Along the Way. This is our third episode into our deep dive of Israel and Palestine, and we'll get started on that in just a few moments. Let me get my microphone sorted out here very quickly. Great, I think we're good to go. Of course, Some Stops Along the Way podcast is a companion to my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way. You can find it on Amazon. There's a lot of good stuff in here about some great countries in the world, some interesting people, geopolitics. I think you'll like it. Before we get started on the continuation of our discussion of Israel and Palestine, though, I want to recommend some books for you this morning. One of them is this one by Emma Williams. It's called It's Easier to Reach Heaven Than the End of the Street. And this is a really poignant memoir of the time that she and her family spent in Israel and Palestine. I think that you'll really enjoy it. It's fairly middle of the road, although it does in some cases appear to be a little more friendly to one side than the other, but it is a memoir and it has some really interesting stories in it that I think that you would enjoy. I also want to recommend a couple of books by a good friend of mine, an Israeli by the name of Gershon Baskin. Gershon has been a friend for probably close to 20 years now, and he's written a couple of fantastic books that if you really want to dive into all the complexities of peace in Israel and Palestine, you're going to want to read these. One is entitled In Pursuit of Peace in Israel and Palestine, and the other is called The Negotiator. Gershon was the chief negotiator in freeing IDF soldier Gilad Shalit from Hamas. And it's a really interesting book. I have an autographed copy of it. You'll be on the edge of your seat with this one. And then In Pursuit of Peace in Israel and Palestine, Gershon really explores in very deep depth some of the issues that we discussed in the last episode of this podcast. So I think that you'll really like both of those. Another one that I want to plug today is called The Sunflower. This was written by Simon Wiesenthal, who was a Holocaust survivor, and it really talks about forgiveness, and it has a lot of experts around the world weigh in on the subject of forgiveness, which certainly is something that's been in short supply in Israel and Palestine for many years. So, some reading there if you want to do it. Where do we go from here? Wow. I think that where I want to start today in kind of moving on from or linking to the last episode is with this security wall in Israel. And the reason I want to start there is because this has become the manifestation of everything that's complex about this particular area of the world. The security wall, or the West Bank barrier, as it's called, is a separation barrier that was built by Israel along the Green Line, which is the border of the West Bank, to in their rationalization to create a barrier against Palestinian political violence. However, the Palestinians, as I talked about in the last episode, view this as an element of racial segregation and feel that it is equivalent to apartheid. In fact, they often call it that. The wall is 708 kilometers long, and 15% of its length runs along the green line or the border or inside Israel. The remaining 85% running as much as 18 kilometers inside of the West Bank itself. So it's not on the border. And this effectively isolates about 9% of the land and approximately 25,000 Palestinians from the rest of their own territory. So this wall, all I can tell you about this wall is my own recollection, my own experience from having worked in that region. Every time I would see that wall, I would think about places like East Berlin, places like Cyprus, where people were physically separated from each other. And each side had what they felt like were good reasons for this to occur. Now, there wasn't a physical wall in Cyprus, but there was this buffer zone and these checkpoints that separates, and to this day still separates people. The Berlin Wall, of course, is long gone, dismantled in 1989, to the joy of people around the world. And yet we're still building walls to this day. Here in the United States, we have a lot of debate about building a wall between Mexico and the United States. The United States government's feeling is that protects our security. Those on the other side of that wall feel like that is a barrier to their freedom and is an affront to their race, akin to racism. So two different perspectives, a very complex issue. Same is true in Israel and Palestine. But here's the difference. As I said, a significant part of this wall does not run along the border. It runs through Palestine, separating the Palestinians from their own people. And this is something that was decried by the United Nations. It's egregious to the Palestinians, but is very much supported by rank and file Israelis, especially the Israeli military, as a way to protect their security and to protect those Israeli settlers who are surrounded by Palestinian communities. Very, very tricky and complicated issue. Let me break it down for you. I want to give you a couple of examples that I think will drive this home. And I want you to listen very carefully and walk with me through this. First of all, maybe this example will help you understand the Palestinian perspective a little bit more. Let's say, hypothetically, that you and your family have a small house on a piece of land where you had lived for literally generations. You didn't necessarily have a deed to that property. You had a deed to the house, but you didn't necessarily have a deed to the property. but it had been in your family for generations. You'd lived there your whole life, and your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, you'd all lived there for multiple generations. Lived in peace and happiness and relative economic security. And across the road from that house one way was a school that your children go to. Just down the road in another direction was the factory where you and your family had worked for many years to create income. Across another road in a different direction were the fields where you grow food for your family and others in the community. Across the road in this fourth direction was the church that you had always attended. And as I said, you lived there happily and at peace. But then one day, a family shows up. And they believe that this land is part of their ancestral home. And they've been separated from the land for a long time, and they want to come back. And so they build a house across the road from you on land that you argue is yours. But yet you have no deed to it, and so you have no legal way to stop them from building there. So they build this house. And not only do they do that, but they limit access across the road to your children's school. They don't want you crossing the property that they now occupy to get to your children's school. So now you have to go all the way around, miles out of your way, to take your children to school. Let's say that a few months later, another family shows up. And for the same reason, they say that this is our ancestral land, we're coming back, and they build a house in another direction, very near your property. And again, you have no recourse because you don't have a deed to the land, and so it's a very big challenge, and the authorities won't help you because even though you've occupied this land for generations, you don't have any claim. And so they build this home and they limit access across their property to the factory where you've always worked. And so now to get to work, you have to go miles out of your way to get to work, just like you have to go miles out of your way to get your children to school. And then let's say a year later, another family comes. Same thing. They say this property belongs to us generationally. We're now coming back. We want to live on it. And they build a home there, and there's nothing you can do. You try to fight it. You even get in conflict with your neighbors, but you can't stop it. And they build a home there. And they don't want you crossing their property, so they limit the access there to the fields where you grow your vegetables. So now you only have one way out, and you have to go a long way around to your fields to grow vegetables, miles out of your way to school, miles out of your way to work. And then a few months later, another family shows up, and same thing. They build in the other direction. And now they've limited access to your place of worship. But now you don't have any, and they limit access as well. So now you can't get out at all without permission from one or more of these people. And so you fight against this and you try to go through anyway, and it creates a lot of conflict. And so they build a wall to stop you from going through, and they build big gates so that now you have to have their permission to even leave the property that you've lived on for generations. And they close off access, if they want to your children's school, to the factory where you work, to the fields where you grow your vegetables, to your place of worship. And if they decide to let you pass through and go about your daily life, they can do that. If they decide not to, then you can go nowhere. Think about how frustrating that would be. Think about how upset you would be. Think about how unfair you would think that is. That's the Palestinian reality on a daily basis. Now, you can argue from now on as to whether that land was ever theirs to begin with, and whether or not these returnees, in this case Israelis, have the right to build on that land and to secure their own properties and their own livelihoods by building a wall and limiting ingress and egress. You can argue that from now on. But the fact is that the Palestinians themselves are frustrated and upset because they feel trapped. They want to take care of their families like we want to take care of ours. They want to worship like we want to worship. They want to grow vegetables like we grow vegetables. They want their children to be educated like we do. And yet all of this is limited to them because of this conflict. Let's look at the other side now. Let's say that you are a family who has lived in Europe for years. You were raised there, outside of your ancestral homeland. But Europe is your home. And yet Europe goes up in flames in the late 1930s and 1940s with World War II. You've built a business there. You've been educated there. You've built a life there. And yet this megalomaniac, Adolf Hitler, begins to control Europe. And really eradicates your way of life. He takes your business. He brands, he puts the equivalent of a brand on you with the Star of David sewn to your coat or to your shirt or to your dress or your blouse. He and his followers round you up like cattle. They take all of your possessions. They take you to camps. They exterminate more than 6 million of your countrymen. They really eradicate the life that you had, so you have essentially nothing to go back to. And so when this is all over, you have the chance to go back to your ancestral home. And everything that you knew in Europe, or in this case, if Russia or where you lived prior, is gone. It's gone. So you decide to go back to your ancestral home. And in 1948, you and your family go back to Israel. And it's a difficult life. It's a new country. You're having to rebuild everything that you built in Europe for all of those years. And then as you're starting to build your life, you're under constant threat from those around you who feel that you're encroaching on land that they have inhabited. And you still build your life and you move forward. And in 1967, the Six-Day War happens, the West Bank is overtaken, and settlements began to be put in the West Bank. And all of a sudden now you're offered land where you can go and maybe even live closer to your what would have been your ancestral home. And you've got a little kibbutz and you're able to grow food and be with your own community outside of one of the large cities like Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or Haifa. And so you decide to do that. And by doing that, you become a pariah for the world. You become the poster child for racism and for conflict and for what some even call apartheid. You become not just the enemy of the Palestinians, you become really a symbol for oppression around the whole world. And all you want to do is live your life. Not an easy issue. Regardless of which side you're on, there's nothing easy about it. I wish that someone could wave a magic wand and change the mindset and resolve the issue. But that's simply not going to occur. I've had so many discussions with people on both sides of this issue. I've had discussions that made me angry. I've had discussions that made me hopeful. I've had discussions that I felt were based in reality and led to resignation. But all of those conversations have added to my belief that it's wrong, it's disingenuous, it's a mistake to oversimplify this issue. Remember in the first episode when I talked about crossing the Kalindia checkpoint that day and having to go through what they call the cattle stalls, a walking checkpoint with my Palestinian colleagues? I felt very bad that day, very obtuse. But it paled in comparison with how they must have felt. I saw the look on their faces. And these were men that I respected that would never have hurt anyone, that certainly supported the Palestinians in this whole issue, but were not antagonistic at all to the Israelis. And I saw the looks on their faces. I saw the angst when they were walking through that checkpoint. I saw the dust on their shoes and the dirt that they accumulated on their suits as we walked through that trash dump to get to a walking checkpoint. That'll stay with me forever. And it gave me a little window into the challenge of the whole situation. I stood on one of the main streets in Ramallah and saw people queuing up in the heat, young and old, and everyone in between queuing up in the heat to try to cross a Calendia checkpoint so that they could go worship on a sacred holiday in their religion. And how tired and upset and hungry and thirsty they were as they just tried to cross and live their life. On the other hand, I've been at an Israeli checkpoint when violence broke out that they did not cause. They were attacked by angry Palestinians and were forced to defend themselves when they didn't want to. They didn't want a conflict. It came to them unprovoked. Now one would say, well, just the fact that Israel occupies the territory is provocation. But these young IDF soldiers were just doing their job. Many of them don't even want to be there. Military service is required. They just want to do their military service and live their lives. And most of them, I would say a big majority of these young soldiers don't have bad feelings against the Palestinians. Some of them don't even fully understand the situation. They're doing their job. They have to, as anyone in the military would, defend their area. I've seen Jewish settlers who feel like they had a right to live in their settlement within the West Bank, be forced from their homes by their own government, by their own soldiers, and forcibly relocated back in Israel after they had been told that it was okay to move to that settlement. It was okay to build a life there. And yet, overnight, their schools, their synagogues, their homes, everything was taken, and they had to go back to Israel. Anyone who says that they fully understand all of this is probably being disingenuous. Unless you've lived there and you deal with it every day, you don't understand it. So please don't say that you do. And I'm not saying that I do, but I spent more time there probably than a lot of expatriates. I think the important thing for us to realize is that sitting here an ocean away, it's very easy to draw conclusions. It's very easy to make complex things simple. It's very easy to turn on Fox News or CNN and believe and rote what we're told, what we see on the television screen or on the computer screen. But it's much more difficult when you're living there among people who have to deal with this as part of their daily life. And you care about those people and you want to help those people. And your heart literally aches for them, whether they're Palestinians or whether they're Israelis. I think also, too, that it's very easy for us to fall into the mindset that only one side are quote-unquote terrorists, or only one side is creating the unsafe conditions. And certainly Hamas has done nothing to absolve this conflict. In fact, they've escalated it every chance that they got. The Palestinian Authority has been culpable in that as well, although they've been much more moderate in recent years. But you need to understand that there are radical Israeli factions as well, who continually stoke this fire of animosity that is burning in this region. No one's hands are clean. And once we understand that, I think we can truly begin to analyze this situation in an objective way. I remember my last night in Jerusalem. I will likely go back to Jerusalem again. I certainly hope that I do. But in my business, you never knew whether when you left a place you were ever going to come back. And I remember my last night. Ronit and I had dinner in Tel Aviv on the beach. Beautiful sunset. Sitting there at that beach cafe. It was beautiful. Relaxing. Everything that you want for your last night in a place. And we talked a lot about the project and what had worked and what hadn't, and what we'd accomplished. And we laughed. We shed a few tears as well. Because there had been a lot of sand through the hourglass during that period. We'd gone through a lot together as a team. And we were just reflecting on that. And I remember after dinner, we walked on the beach and I kicked off my shoes and walked in the sand and felt that Mediterranean water on my feet. And that's where I came up with this concept, hope and hopelessness, which is the title of this section in my memoir. On one side, there has to be hope of a resolution to this conflict. There has to be. If there's no hope, then nothing, not even incremental progress will be made. But at the same time, walking on that beach, I had this overwhelming feeling of hopelessness. This overwhelming feeling that whatever we did wasn't enough. Did we make progress? Yes. Did we promote dialogue? Yes. Did we promote trade? Yes. Did we promote increased economic opportunities for Palestinians and Israelis both? Absolutely. Did we achieve more than even our client thought we would achieve? Absolutely we did. And yet I felt this sense of hopelessness. I remember going back to the hotel and just looking out at the lights over Tel Aviv and realizing that I was getting ready to fly off to another assignment. But the people we'd been trying to help, that was their home. They were staying there. For good, for bad, for everything in between, they were staying. So just sharing these final thoughts, I don't know that we can come to any conclusion. But that's not the purpose of this podcast to begin with. We're not here to make political statements or to analyze who's right and wrong in situations. I'm here to share my observations of a place that I worked, the people I interacted with, and give you a perspective of what it was like and what it continues to be like to live and work there. Certainly, Israel and Palestine are more complex than others. but every place has its own complexity. So, I'll end it here with this final thought. One of the things that this podcast wants to accomplish is not just an understanding of countries and people and culture, but really to capture some elements of leadership and how we as individuals can learn to be better leaders, to be active in promoting fairness and equity, and to promote constructive dialogue. And I hope that these episodes about Israel and Palestine have at least made you think. Maybe they've made you angry. Maybe you disagree with me totally. If I've done it right, people on both sides of this issue disagree with me. And hopefully partially agree with me as well. Because I'm not here to take sides, and I never was. That was the worst thing you could do in that area of the world, is take sides. So I hope from a leadership standpoint, what we can capture from this is that as leaders, we have to see all sides of an issue. We have to take the time to really dig in and understand something as much as we can. And not just react, not just believe what we hear or believe what we've been told, but really dig in and understand as much as possible what is happening, and realize that we don't live in a black and white world. We don't live in a world where there's an answer to every question. We don't live in a world where one people group is always right and another people group is always wrong. We live in a world of gray. We live in a world where complexities abound, where noise is all around us, where disinformation is all around us. So we have to muddle through that. And if we don't, then we end up being one of those people on social media who just repost memes that fit their personal social or political philosophy, and doesn't know the background, doesn't even understand what they're posting. And I don't think any of us want to be that way. So I'm asking you, whether you agree with what I said in these episodes or disagree, do your own research. Dig in. Seek to understand. Because that'll make you a better leader, but also it'll make you a more well-rounded, knowledgeable person. Thanks for joining today. The podcast, Some Stops Along the Way. And we'll see you next time, where we examine another country that is going to be profoundly interesting, and I think you'll enjoy it. See you next Monday.